We don't take the time to really sort through our perfectionist tendencies. And also, it kind of ties into people pleasing too, right? Um, and we want to just sort through some of these things and not have to address them ever again. And it doesn't work like that. When we grew up in an environment that was filled with tying our identity to our accomplishments or was very black and white thinking, it can take a lot of time to really unlearn and pull those things apart. And what I did last night, and I'll talk a little bit about it. Um, what I did last night is really talk about how you can start to pull apart your accomplishments from who you are as a person, right? So separating the what from the who. And I offered this mind map that was really helpful for people, and I can actually link it. I'll link it in the show notes. But what it basically is just a map to start to separate, okay, what do I do from who am I as a person? And I think a lot of times in business or as an athlete, as just like a person, it can be really hard to detach or pull away those two things, right? We're so used to describing ourselves as what we do, right? I am a therapist. I am a coach. I am a physical therapist. I am a mentor. I am so and so job. I am so and so athlete. And after a while, it's exhausting, right? Because we have to uphold what the perception of that accomplishment is, right? And God forbid we fail, right? God forbid we get rejected, because if our identity is tied to that thing that we are accomplishing, and then we end up not accomplishing it, or we end up having some kind of stumble or a challenge that comes up, we end up being devastated by it. We are completely broken by it. So it's really important, especially in business, especially as an athlete, especially as a high achiever, a CEO. We have to learn that who we are is not what we do. And we have to start to pull those things apart. Let me ask you this. If I asked you to describe yourself without describing anything that you've accomplished or anything that you do, what would you say? Most people have a really hard time answering that question, because the root of our perfectionism is based on believing that your worth is based on your accomplishments or your achievements. And where that comes from is so many different places, right? It can come from a lot of different places, but I talked a little bit about how rigid, high expectations from our parents and caregivers can be part of that. Highly critical, shaming, or abusive parents or caregivers. Excessive praise for your achievements. Like if you got overly praised for achieving something, this can also cause perfectionism, or perfectionist tendencies and people pleasing. Excessive, low self-esteem or feeling inadequate. That can also cause us to be people pleasers or fall into those perfectionist tendencies. Believing your worth is determined by your achievements. Black and white thinking or all or nothing thinking. I know a lot of us fall trapped to all or nothing thinking. And what that is if I can't do it all, or if I can't make it look perfect, then it's not even worth doing. And then efforts to feel in control, right? We a lot of times fall into those perfectionist tendencies and people pleasing because we want to feel like we are in control, and doing those things makes us feel like we are. And also cultural expectations can be a challenge too. Depending on what your background is, that can cause you to have those perfectionist tendencies, especially if it's cultural pressure that comes up. And the way that I kind of break this down for clients, I kind of want to walk you guys through my 7 steps. because I think it could be valuable in thinking about how you can start to sort through these things. The first thing I do is what I'm talking about right now, where I separate your identity from your accomplishments. So we start to think about what are things that define who I am and not just what I do. So we start to pull apart those things. We start to acknowledge our experiences that kind of shaped that, and then start raising emotional intelligence by journaling, by talking through things, by being able to acknowledge some of the things that caused us to fall into these perfectionist tendencies. And then step 3 is identifying your internal narrative. It's the story that you tell yourself about who you are. It's usually shaped by the things that we were told growing up or experiences we had growing up. And then through identifying that, because usually it's pretty negative, we start to resolve, rewire, and rewrite that story, right? So we rewrite the narrative. We rewrite the narrative that we want to have about ourselves, even if we don't believe it yet. And then as a result of that, we get clear on our core values, right? We identify what I value. It's so easy to get caught up in what other people value and attach ourselves to those things, whether it's our parents or coaches or teachers that were really impactful on us. We can attach ourselves to their values very quickly if we aren't sure of what ours are. Sometimes we even adopt our friends' values, and then we stop to think about it and we're like, well, that's not really in alignment with what I want for my life. In business, this is so important because to make decisions, to feel like you are making progress, it's really important to be operating in alignment with your values as a person, as a business, and we can even have core values that overlap in those two things. And then step 6 becomes understanding what's healthy and unhealthy as far as dynamics go. And then step 7 is learning how to set boundaries for success. Because if you aren't clear, or if you are a people pleaser, or if you tend to be a perfectionist, it can be really hard to set boundaries with yourself, but also with other people, because it usually is very difficult for people to communicate those things when they struggle with perfectionism and people pleasing. So I'll put the mind map in the comments below. This is the first step in starting to really sort through your perfectionism and people pleasing, because once you start to separate those two things, a perfect example of this is a lot of times we're afraid to put ourselves out on social media, right? Or we become so focused on whatever we put out being perfect that we don't even end up putting it out anymore. I call that perfectionism paralysis. And if we start to pull apart our identity from our accomplishments, then what we're putting out there is just an idea. And if someone rejects that idea, it doesn't have anything to do with us, or it doesn't have to do with our identity, right? We are just a vessel for that information to come through. When we pull apart our identity of like who we are from what our accomplishments are, what our ideas are, what our solutions for people are. And when you're able to do that, it's so much easier to just put out information and not really care about what people think. Because if someone rejects it, it's just an idea. It's separate from my identity. And I think we become, because as entrepreneurs, because as athletes, because as high achievers, we tie ourselves so deeply to our accomplishments that anytime we are rejected, anytime something doesn't work out, it hits us so hard because we've attached our whole selves to that thing. And the first step in starting to break through some of that is starting to separate our identity from what we accomplish.